Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar on flats above shops, recycling, simpler recycling. One of the most challenging areas, I guess, for local authorities and housing managers. Big thanks to Shelley Holmes and Lucy Simler, who joined us today to share their experience. Been working on a couple of pilot projects around flats above shops, which I found extremely illuminating. So to the opportunity to share that with you all. I don't like long introductions, so I'm going to pass to Shelley. Shelley, please take it away.
Thank you. There we go. So hi everyone, my name is Shelley. I'm an advisor in the local authority support team at Relondon, and I was the project manager for this project for 2 years. So Relondon, for those of you who don't know us, we're a partnership between the Mayor of London and London's boroughs, and we exist to help London transition to a low carbon circular economy. So we ran this pilot for 2 years. So we focused purely on flats above shops, like you see in this photo here. And the reason for focusing on flats above shops was really kind of a demand from our London boroughs to understand how they could implement food waste recycling, which is obviously due 31st of March next year. So what's that, 10 months time, and to also see how they could boost recycling from these property types as well. So that was really the main drivers of this project. And we partnered with 3 London boroughs. That was the London boroughs of Hammersmith and Fulham, Islington and Waltham Forest. You can see them on the map here. And all of the flats above shops in this pilot presented the same way. So they all presented on the street on street sacks, like you can see in this photo here. They all had what's called time-banded collections. So that's where the residents can only put their waste out at certain times and on certain days of the week. So they can't just put their waste out whenever. They all had theoretical access to a dry mix recycling service, and none of them had access to a food waste service prior to this pilot as well. So we did lots and lots of research for this pilot, but one of the more interesting bits of research we did was with a company for this, what's called ethnographic research. Now, ethnographic research is the study of behaviours, I guess, but in context of the environment that people live in. So rather than interviewing people one-to-one kind of out in the street, you go into their homes and kind of see what their routines are. So these are sample of some of the residents. So there were 30 participants across 10 London boroughs who all had access to a dry mix recycling service, and they lived in a flat above shop. And actually this research was really, really interesting, because the researchers kind of found that actually recycling a flat above a shop is really difficult. People often don't know where to put their waste. Their nature is really confusing. There's no signage like there would be in a purpose block of flats, for example. You don't have your own bins like you would in a curbside property. And it also might be the business that you live kind of above might have a different collection schedule to you, or they might be doing something different to you, which really adds more to the confusion. They also share a post box, and it never really, I guess it makes sense when you think about it retrospectively, but it never really, I thought about it just before. And what it meant was that they weren't reading information that was sent to them because it wasn't addressed to them. So posts often just piled up in the hallways. So it meant that anything that council send in, they didn't read. They weren't reading information on the bags that councils usually use to communicate how to recycle. And the most important thing about this was that their behaviour was very strongly influenced by others, regardless of what the council rules were. So it meant that if someone was put in a bag by a tree, they would also follow that as well. So what we then did after looking at our ethnographic research and selecting our 3 boroughs, we went out and tried and whittle down some pilot streets. So we had 3 streets that were on a dry recycling only kind of street, and the other 3 were dry recycling and food waste as well. So most of the streets kind of ranged from about 150-ish households to 200, and there was one street which I must have been highly caffeinated that day. We decided to do the whole entire street of 400 households, so that was absolutely massive. But we wanted to kind of see the effects of doing the entire street and not just half of it. And I would be lying if I said that this was really nice and easy. We just went out, decided where we're going to put the stuff and kind of Bob's your uncle. It was really, really difficult. So here are some of the things that we experienced. And for anyone else who's run that flats above shops, you'll probably experience the same thing as well. So we had lots of on-the-street parking and often back-to-back parking. What that meant was when we're obviously considering a food waste unit, it was about how the crews were going to collect this waste. So they couldn't roll the bins in between cars, for example. So it's thinking about opportunities of how the crew are actually going to collect this waste. In addition, as you can see in the top left corner here, we had lampposts and doors opening onto the pavement. So we needed to make sure that any bins were situated where people could actually exit their cars. We also had newly installed bollards, cycle lanes, etc., that were kind of going on at the same time. So it meant that, again, reducing the opportunities for the crews to be able to stop. No pavement is the same width. So although a street might look the same width, parts of it will be really narrow and parts of it will be really wide. So you can't just have a one-size-fits-all approach to it. It's got to be section by section. The street is also used for other teams, so like e-cargo bikes, for example. So you might have found a perfect spot for your bin, but actually that's where the sustainable transport team, for example, might be also kind of eyeing up for their space as well. So there's really lots of different and practical challenges that we had to think about when introducing this. And also for the stakeholders, again, I didn't really appreciate before I started this project of how many stakeholders there might be. So in London, for example, there's the street scene is there's lots of people who manage the street scene basically. So it meant that in some areas one crew was collecting from one side of the street, another crew was collecting from another side of the street. So already you've got disparity between the two. They've got different supervisors, so communication can be quite tricky. We also, in some areas that we're working on at the moment, also had to run things past the police just in case the proposals might have potential to cause some additional antisocial behaviour issues. And we also had to conform to any heritage and conservation guidelines as well, basically, that might not be the design of the bin that we originally aimed for. So what we then did, because it's a super tricky place to work on, we enlisted the expertise of a behaviour change agency, and they came up with these 5 key principles for us to follow throughout the project in order to maximise success. So I'm just going to go through these now. So thinking about getting things to people and thinking about internal storage, what we wanted to do was think about how people would utilise these items in their homes. So you live in a flat above a shop, you're probably not going to have a massive kitchen or lots of space. That's often what we find in flats, like purpose-built flats, for example. So we had these really small 3 litre with a hook food caddies, and we ordered those. The residents also got 2 tea bags as a way to help prompt them to start the food service. They also got delivered a line of rollers, a roll of 10 liners that were slightly thicker than normal, and they also just got like this really fun little cute tea bag rest just to encourage them to dry their food essentially. And for one street in particular, because again we couldn't get into through letterboxes, they were really narrow. So if you can see, if the video will play, there we go. We developed this flat pack cardboard caddy as a way to test whether we could actually get food waste to people. So it meant that rather than having to wait for a caddy, or if we couldn't deliver the caddy on the first instance, it was just a way of people being able to start using their food service, and then they could scan the QR code on the top of this and either get one delivered or one ordered to them. And for residents who were just having a dry recycling service, we flat packed all the sacks, made them smaller and put them into these really nice packages essentially, and everything was also addressed to them. For external infrastructure, because the streets we were on basically were just too narrow to have housing units, so we chose 2 different designs. They were really slim, so they're about 35 centimetres wide or so, and for the streets where we had dry recycling, for 2 streets were inspired by Hounslow and Newham, who've previously done grit bins for flat above shops. So it was just a way for residents to store their recycling in a secure location whilst waiting for the crews to come and collect them essentially. We also refreshed all of the signage on the lampposts, and we also put down these floor waste vinyls as well as a way to inform residents of where they should put their waste, but also the time and days that they should put their waste on as well. And we're working with another London borough at the moment. We've also taken the same approach, again, mostly because we couldn't fit any larger bins in the locations we work in. And finally, what we also wanted to do is inform the businesses. So about 6 weeks before residents were due to get the interventions, we delivered them a letter, and we door knocked as well at the weekends. We delivered the letter in, what's the word I'm looking for? An envelope, basically, because people generally don't tend to read stuff that's put in through envelopes, particularly in this circumstance as well. So we had a chat to everyone, or as many people as we could do. We also spoke to the businesses. So we went and did door knocking for businesses. We went and spoke to them in person, delivered letters, and we also attended business forums as well to let them know what was going on and kind of address any concerns that they may have had. For residents, we also had these really cute countertop cards, which are the ones on the right. So it just meant if you were living above a cafe, for example, and you came down for your morning coffee, it's just another reminder of what you need to do with your waste. And we also used delivery companies actually for this project. So I didn't want this project to be rushed. I knew that getting stuff to people is going to be really challenging. So we hired local, low carbon, so either e-cargo bikes or electric vans to deliver these. This was their expertise. This is what they deliver every day. So it meant that they had the time to actually try and get information to people as well. So we had a staged delivery process. So the first one was handing stuff to residents directly. If they couldn't hand stuff directly to residents, then it was leave the items in a safe place. The third delivery was if no one was in, then they could actually post the items through the door because we had them all flat packed. And the fourth one was if there was no way of getting anything to anyone, so maybe the letterboxes were way too small, we had these really nice sorry missed you cards just to inform the residents that stuff was coming. So for the results, so we knew that this would be really tricky to monitor in maybe traditional ways that you'd monitor waste and recycling service improvements. The reason for this is the street is used by everyone. You've obviously got commercial waste, not only residential waste as well. So we needed to understand how we could maybe take a more holistic approach to monitoring. So we had advice from two M&E specialists to help kind of guide us on what we could maybe realistically do and what the limitations of the different approaches were as well. So here's just some examples. There's lots of results to go through, so I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but I just kind of want to summarise what we found. So basically, one of the first things we saw was potentially an increase in recycling from 2 streets. I really want to heavily caveat this by saying we think it was 2 streets that had sustained recycling improvements. The reason is there's so many different factors that could affect the results, so we don't want to be absolutely yes, this definitely worked. What was really interesting that came out of this was actually the amount of refuse that was being put out as well. So on some streets, the amount of the ratio, of recycling to refuse was like 1 to 9, for example. Some streets it kind of evened out a bit, but yeah, there was lots and lots of refuse put out that we counted, and we strongly suspect some of this was potentially commercial waste misuse as well. For example, where there's unidentified flat bags being next to trees, for example. And when we talked about those floor vinyls, so we also wanted to know, well, did people use the floor vinyls? Did they recognise them? Did they use them? Were they a useful reminder of where to put your waste and when to put it out? And generally speaking, yes. We had really good compliance actually. So this is what compliance looks like on the floor vinyls. I didn't stage this. This is exactly how it was when I rocked up and took these photos. But you can see here there's a real effort of quite a few of the residents that actually put their waste out at the right time and at the locations that we'd kind of marked on the street. What I would say is the results of this were very likely affected by the weather. So this time last year, unlike this year, it was the 17th wettest year since records began. So it meant that for February and March, when we first laid the floor vinyl, some of these just literally almost washed away. So we had to remove them. So for Street B, for example, where that was particularly prominent, you can see there was lower recognition and a low proportion of stacks were put in the right locations. But actually, once we relaid the vinyls in a lot of locations, compliance went, really quite high, which was really, really positive. And we asked residents in a midpoint survey, what have you done differently? Has this improved or has anything affected what you do? So actually, the first question of what have you noticed differently, lots of people said that they noticed the floor vinyls on the street, which was really positive. Some of them also noticed the lamp signage, the refreshed lamp signage, and a few people who recognised the postcards in their businesses, basically. I think, again, this completely first kind of seeing what I saw when I went out there. So for the floor vinyl recognition, for example, that was as low as 30% in some areas, particularly on Street B, for example, where a lot of them had washed off or had come up by the time the door knocker went to interview the residents. But in some areas where the floor vinyls had stuck beautifully, the recognition for that was over 90% as well. So there's a real variation at were the floor vinyls down at the time of the resident interview being undertaken. And second thing was posters and cards in businesses. So some businesses were fantastic and they kept them up for a lot of, pretty much the duration of the project. Some of them, when I'd returned maybe the week after, they'd taken them down already. So I'd expect quite a lot of variation in that as well. And when we asked residents, what have you changed your behaviour, or how have you changed your behaviour? So we had a lot of people who said that actually now these interventions had helped them put their waste and recycling out at the correct time, which is fantastic. That's kind of what one of the aims of this project was, really. How do we get information to people? How do residents know what to do? Some people said they were recycling more than they did before, and some people, where the location had changed for their waste and recycling presentation, had also said, yep, I'm now also putting my bags in a different location to what I did before, which is great. And for the 3 streets where we had a food waste service, we had high claimed usage across all 3 streets. And when we asked residents, okay, well, what do you like about your service and what do you not like about your new food waste service? So the majority responded that they really liked the small compact caddy. They really liked that it was nice and easy to line. And when we asked them what they didn't like about their food waste service, or is there anything that you're not quite sure about, the ones I've highlighted in red there are all related to liner queries. So I've run out of food waste liners, I was recycling my food and I don't know where to get more liners from, or I don't want to pay for new liners. So that was kind of the main issue that people who chose to respond to what don't you like about your food service said to us, really. And for the pop-up caddy, this was obviously a complete gamble. So we wanted to understand whether people used the pop-up caddy, if they liked it. No one else has done anything like this, I don't think. So it really was like it might be a bit of a Marmite love it or hate it situation. But actually, of the people that used it, again, it was only for one street, so it was a very small number of people who were able to survey about this. But they thought it was a good idea, so no one hated it, which is great. And then 3/4 of them then went on to order a permanent plastic caddy, which again was really quite interesting and quite strong results for that as well, for the limited number of people we were able to speak to. What we also did as well for food waste is measure how much food was being captured. So this was going to the bins and basically spot checking whether there was food in it or not, if it's contaminated. And for one street, I was able to take bin weights as well, had some portable scales. So at the start of this project, we thought that the maximum capture rate for food waste would be 30%. And this was based on our previous flats, purpose-built flats work, where the capture rate was around 30%. And that was everything, new signage, new bins, everyone got a caddy, etc. That had like the full service suite of interventions, I should say, that people could get. So we thought realistically, flats with shops around 30%, we envisioned this is the capture rate. For the one street where I was able to collect reliable weights, it worked out to around 22% capture rate. And for one borough that's not mentioned in this project that we're working with separately, their food waste capture was around about 28%, I believe. So I think 30% is a fair way to think about how much food waste might be captured for flats worth shops. This equated to 0.65 kilos per week per household, which is really good and in line with what you'd expect from a rising for a flat, which is great. And the average bin weight was around 7 kilos. And for this particular street, where we had reliable weight data, about 93% of the bins contained food in them. Again, that was really, really positive. But one thing that people need to understand, certainly waste managers who are on this call, is that pretty much on every monitoring occasion, the bins had some form of litter in them. So most of it was street litter. So, plastic bottles, pop bottles, coffee cups, for example, takeaway packaging. And sometimes this, was literally just a single cup in a food bin. But sometimes, particularly in pockets of certain areas, the contamination was really quite significant. I'll come on to this a bit later on in my conclusion, but for those who are operationally based on this call, I cannot stress enough how managing contamination really needs to happen for this, because otherwise your bins will be contaminated. And the other metrics, so right at the start, I said about, we spend this time trying to flat pack everything and make sure that we get stuff through to residents. We had really tiny post boxes, letter boxes, and, people generally didn't read anything if it was just shoved through the door that was unaddressed to them. So what we can see here is that the residents who were surveyed had a really high recognition of receiving the recycling pack, which is really great. I was really worried about that. And for the 2 streets where we tried to deliver the purpose plastic caddies, I should say, you can see there, that's street C and F. They had lower delivery success rates there, and that was not only the delivery companies going out, but also myself and the officers then going out 2 or 3 extra times to try and deliver them. So flat packing and putting stuff direct through the letterbox, because the flat packs could fit through the letterboxes, that had a higher delivery success rate than being able to deliver the caddies themselves. And what we also as well did for the final kind of phase of research was we had resident interviews in their homes as well, around kind of what worked well for them, what didn't work as well. So this represents here the findings of 15 residents around 6 months after they'd received interventions. And again, this was just to understand if there'd been any long-term behaviour changes. So what the researchers found with residents was it encouraged them to, having a food service encouraged them to recycle their food waste, which is really great. They really liked the fact they didn't have to wait for the time banding collections to put their food out. They could do it whenever. They really liked that the pack that we gave them was addressed and delivered to them. They really picked up on that. They also thought the street was neater and tidier because the waste was now more organised. So they know they had to put their waste on the floor vinyls at, between 6 and 9 a.m, for example, on a Monday or Wednesday. And they also thought the street was neater as well, and because there were fewer foxes ripping the bags open because the food had been diverted into an actual food waste bin rather than being left in the general waste bags as well. And what didn't work as well, this is like the $1 million question for pretty much every waste and recycling project, is we don't think we're able to engage those who are less motivated to recycle. I think that I'm not sure of any project that's been able to really boost people who don't already have maybe an acute interest in recycling. So we're not quite sure how best or what else to do to engage those who are maybe less motivated to recycle. Again, like I said before, the floor vinyls sometimes came off because of the weather, and that led to some confusion of residents being like, oh, am I still meant to do this thing when the vinyl's been removed? And they were also a bit still unsure about how to access more recycling sacks as well. But we had some really great feedback from the residents. So the box in yellow is kind of the positive comments that we had, and then the box in black is the one that some of the more what's the word I'm looking for? Constructive criticism that we had back about the project as well. But overwhelmingly, we had excellent feedback from residents and genuinely very, very, very few complaints as well, considering how much we did. So what I would say for your project to consider and some of the challenges, the initial engagement with residents who live in flats above shops is really challenging. Not only ourselves, but the 3 behaviour change companies that we contracted to deliver different parts of the work all said that they were a really, really difficult population to engage, maybe much more difficult than they originally anticipated. There's also lots of stakeholders that you need to consider. Lots of people use the street, so you really need to think about time to engage all the various stakeholders. And we also, like I said, the vinyls really were quite tricky to keep down last year, but this year they'd probably be okay because it's nice and dry. But last year, like I said, there's that giant puddle, which is where some stuff was meant to go. Yeah, so that's pretty much what the streets look like a lot of the time. And we also had some bins on all streets actually stolen. Not quite sure why, but the reason was we weren't allowed to at that time drill them down. So yeah, there might just be some considerations you need to think about how we're actually going to secure them. And just from me, so generally speaking, this project was really excellent to show that people who want to recycle their food waste are actually engaged in the service. We had really good compliance rates for obviously the sacks placement. But really you need to make sure that you engage everyone early. You need to think about the key behavioural principles, I think, to maximise success of this. So really think about it from the residents' point of view. What happens with your operations? Where do they put stuff? And also make sure that you also monitor things regularly as well to make sure that things are going to plan and that any operational processes you've put in place are working. And very quickly, we've now got a toolkit on our website. So this gives you a few operational tick sheets. A lot of this has London focused language, so it talks a lot about Transport for London, but please everyone feel free to use it. Just submit Transport for London for your relevant highways authority, and the report for this outlining the results should be ready for end of June. And just a few practical tips when you're going out. What I absolutely strongly recommend is that you speak with your GIS teams to be able to help you produce maps, like in the top right corner. It's really helpful understanding how many people are living in the flat above a shop, because it's not always obvious from the door, absolutely not. And also just think about all these different points. So, you know, where you're going to put stuff, are there cars blocking where the guys can, or the crews can, you know, take bins? What's the resident access to the collection point? Is it within 30-metre carry distance? And think about all the on-street signage as well. That's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shelley. That's a really thorough piece of work, and interesting that the same old sort of thorny challenges always arise, don't they? Contamination and how you approach those people that are not really motivated to do that. So, Lucy, over to you.
So thanks, Nigel. Hi, everyone. I'm Lucy Simler. I'm a recycling officer at London Borough of Hackney. So we have also done a flats above shop flash food waste trial. So yeah, what I'm going to cover today, I'm going to describe the original flash food waste service that we have in this borough, and what we did for the trial, including the locations and the units that we put in place, the communications that we did, monitoring and the outcomes, lessons learned from the trial, and then what the next steps are. So the original flash service, so we've got about 6,500 flats above shops in Hackney. It's, for those who don't know, it's quite a dense urban borough, and flats above shop make up about 6% of the housing stock. And similar to the other boroughs that Shelley described, these properties have a time-banded collection twice a day, every day, different 2-hour slots in the day for waste and recycling collections, but there was no food waste service. So at that time, 90% of estate properties and all of our street level service have a food waste service, and 160 roughly flats above shops use a nearby Hackney Housing communal food waste bin for their food waste, and some flash properties were using a street level service where they actually had an entrance onto that side road. And so yeah, for the actual trial, we ran the trial from February to April 2023 for 5 of the sites, and then we had an additional site which was actually for metroSTOR lockable bin, because the technology wasn't actually ready at that time, from July to September 2023. And across those 5 sites, 511 flash properties were given the option to recycle food waste for the first time, across using 6 on-street bins across 6 high streets around the borough. Next slide. So prior to starting the trial, we were looking at different options that we could consider for the trial. We thought, could we provide the caddies that we provide for the street level service, as we already have these bins in place, there isn't an additional cost, but where we have provided caddies on smaller high streets before, they've caused a bit of an obstruction, they're more likely to get stolen and can get easily contaminated. So we looked at providing the communal housing units, which is what we provide for our estate properties, which would avoid spillages on the street and eliminate the issue that we'd had with the caddies being knocked over or being stolen. And we could also monitor these bins. The problem is with those that weren't lockable, there's a chance that these bins could get contaminated with non-food items, and also be used by some commercial businesses. They'd have to pay for these bins, and there's a lot of things to consider in terms of where to place the bins. So although we were like, yeah, we want to use communal bins, we would ideally like to use a lockable bin to see if we can overcome this issue with contamination that we'd have with the unlockable bins. So next slide, please. So we considered, we contacted quite a few different companies to see what bins they could provide, and because it was a trial and not many boroughs, I think we're actually one of the first boroughs, had actually trialled this before, they all the suppliers supplied the bins for free. And metroSTOR were working on at that time a key card opening bin, but at the start of the trial in February it wasn't quite ready, which is why we introduced that. That site was introduced later on. The costs for the bins were rough for the lockable, unlockable ones were about roughly to £500, and about at that time £1,540 for the lockable bin, which had a key card opening access. And these bins could fit either 140 or 240 litre bin with either slam lock or foot sunlock feature or foot pedal opening. So these were the locations that we put the bins out in the borough. We were trying to get a range of different high streets, with quite a range of demographics in Hackney to see what areas worked well, but we actually ended up with quite a wide spread across the borough and quite a range of busy and quieter high streets. Next slide. And so when we were doing the assessments, there were a number of considerations that we had to look at before putting the bins out. So in terms of like road markings, for those high streets that were on a red route, we had to consult with TfL before putting the bins out. One of them on Old Street was actually, when we consulted TfL, needed to be moved because of their safety concerns, and we didn't want to put the bins right outside the bus stop because of and access for collection issues, and same with cycle paths. If our crews couldn't collect, then there's no point putting the bin there. There was like quite a few certain roads, Wilton Way especially, had quite narrow pavements, and it wasn't really ideal to have a bin actually on the high street. So that bin actually ended up being set a bit further away from the high street, next a bit on the edge of the road next to an estate. We wanted to make sure that as well that the bins were not too close to any food businesses or food markets, so we to avoid getting complaints from these about like issues with the smell or food being or dumping out on the street. We tried to follow the guidelines to keep the bins within 13 metres from the properties, and where there was already recycling on the go bins or public bin sites, we tried to position these bins, the housing units next to these bins, to reduce the chance of dumping, also contamination in the bins. And so these are the locations of all the bins out in situation. The metroSTOR bin is the last one that got put out, and it's the final picture. But the picture, the third picture actually shows the bin that couldn't be put on the high street, which is put next to, it's called Boscombe House Estate, which is slightly set away from the main parade of shops. So in terms of the communications, we worked in partnership with the North London Waste Authority, who were able to provide us with the bin stickers to go on the units. They also provided us with some staff to help with door knocking. We sent out an initial letter via post to those properties that were nearby the bins to let them know that that the bin was out in situ, and we're going to be doing door knocking. So we door knocked each property twice to try and achieve our contact rate of 40%, to try and talk to as many residents as possible. And when we door knocked, we provided caddies, liner, and the leaflet. You'll see an example on the right-hand side, and a key card for those who had access to the lockable bin. When we door knocked, we also did a survey to try and find out residents' attitudes at that time towards food waste recycling, and to encourage people to complete the survey. We had a prize incentive which was funded by the North London Waste Authority as well. When we did the second visit, when residents were still not there, we posted a letter through the door with some information, with a leaflet and information about the nearby bin. We carried, where we couldn't get access to that many properties, we'd put caddies and leaflets and liners in the hallway where it was safe to do so and wouldn't cause a fire risk, to capture to allow more residents to recycle. And we carried out a follow-up door knocking and survey 3 months after. And so yeah, it was quite resource intensive. And so these are the results of the communication. So we got slightly below our door knocking contact rate, 40%. We spoke to 34% of residents. And of those, 91% wanted to participate in the service, which was like amazing. And that was like 31% of all those who we door knocked, and who up the total number. And the reasons why those residents didn't want to recycle were, there was only like, of the 15 who didn't want to recycle, there's only 10 who weren't already using another service, such as the street level service or a nearby estate. And the reasons were that they in fact didn't have the time, they were concerned about smell, or they're moving out. 5 just didn't give a reason, and 1 was not the owner. So that was very encouraging and positive to see. And as I was saying before, 51%. We left the caddies and liners out. So actually 51% of residents had access, either through door knocking or the caddies and liners being left out to use the service. 6% of door knock properties completed the service, so completed the survey as well. So the survey results. So with the initial survey of the 11 results, it was generally quite positive. Obviously, there was a bit of a bias because people who weren't interested wouldn't wanted to fill out the survey. But all those who did, 100% were like confident, and they said they had the time. They believed recycling food waste was positive, and it would help tackle climate change. And most agreed it was something they cared about. So when we did the follow-up survey, it was slightly different. We spoke to 16 residents, and only 53% said they only use the service, which was a bit lower, or quite a lot lower than those who'd been surveyed originally, and 6% said they never used the service. Most were still confident of using it, and then they had the space and the time, and it was easy for them. But some found separating out their food waste and using the bins unpleasant, and 38% admitted to forgetting to separate out their food waste, and they were also unaware that whether their neighbours were doing it. And so the outcomes from the follow-up survey were, we wanted to obviously ensure the bins outside were clean. And in terms of communications, sending out prompts to remind residents to recycle and highlight the social norms that their neighbours are also recycling food waste as well. So next slide. So in terms of the results of the 3-month trial, we carried out 3 months of weekly monitoring of the bins at each site. We did 2 weeks initial daily monitoring, because obviously to make sure there weren't any issues and deal with them quickly. So the general findings in terms of tonnage, 2.3 tonnes were collected across the 3-week period, which was averaging about 0.2 tonnes per week. And this equates to roughly an annual tonnage of 21 kilograms per household, which is only slightly less than the average collected in this borough for estates, and about just under half the amount collected from street level properties. So not great, but not too, but like pretty similar to estates food waste, which is good. And in terms of dumping, there was generally not too much dumping. Wilton Way, which was the bin which was set away from the high street, had the most dumping. Old Street, which had the lockable bin, had no dumping, which I don't know if it had anything to do with the bin being locked. You think it would probably encourage more dumping, but also in terms of weekly contamination, below the accepted rejection amount, all the sites had some contamination except for the Old Street lockable bin, which was great to see. And the Wilton Way bin actually had 2 loads rejected because they were past the contamination thresholds. Yeah, so that's all for the monitoring. Yep. And these are examples of the type of contamination that we were seeing in the bins. It's mainly just plastic bags, and also coffee cups and general street litter. The Wilton Way bin actually had like a full bag of non-food waste, so that was the rejected load. And as you can see there, the Old Street bin, which had the lockable bin, had no contamination at all. So we carried out 1 month monitoring in September, which was like 4 months after the end of the trial, just to compare that to the monitoring that we'd done in the 3 weeks at the start of the 3 months at the start of the trial. So the total food waste did there was it dropped slightly, which we'd expect. Less people would start using the service, but there were also no rejected loads in that time, and only 1 record of dumping around the unit. Contamination levels were the same, but we found that residents were using their own compostable bags or plastic bags, that they weren't aware that they could order the council provided liners. We didn't, because it was a trial, we didn't add these properties to our council ordering system, so they would have to email to ask for compostable liners to be delivered to them. So maybe that was a bit of a barrier. So in terms of conclusions and lesson learned, we found that the service was well received by the residents using the service. In terms of putting the bins out in carrying out the assessments, there was limited space on High Street, and it was difficult to provide the caddies and liners. Door knocking is important for engagement and delivery of the equipment. Continuous engagement is needed as residents move in and out of these boroughs quite frequently. No contamination was recorded with the lockable bin only. The trial was very resource intensive, so this would be, if we replicated this, which would be very costly for borough-wide, and uptake across the borough may vary depending on the demographics and how well used the bin was. So the next steps. So we started extending the in borough-wide by going out and doing on-street assessments to see suitability for the units. We've got a preference based on the trial preference for the lockable bins, because for the reasons that they do reduce the contamination, either using a keypad or a fob. However, there are some funding limitations. We didn't get our full funding from DEFRA, so we might not be able to put as many on-street bins out as we would like. And we're considering using the nearby Hackney Housing food waste bins, and also considering extending the distance to 5 minutes walk. We're planning to do borough-wide communication without door knocking, but we do like letter delivery, probably roll mail to all flash properties, and some social media comms. We're planning to provide food waste caddies and liners upon request only, to also keep costs down and reduce wastage. Although we may not have the full funding now, we will increase the number of on-street units in the future if we get budget or funding to do this. And that's it. That's the final slide. Thank you. There's my contact details.
Thank you, Lucy. That's really interesting. So just having a look through some of those points, which Shelley's been busy answering some of them. Thank you, Shelley. So there was a point about the weight of food waste and any sort of implications around manual handling. Shelley, do you want to just comment on that?
Yeah, that's fine. So yeah, that's something we really considered at the very start of these projects. Obviously, we don't want crews doing anything they shouldn't be doing, or encourage them to do anything they shouldn't be doing either. So we checked all of the weights. So we calculated the likely weights based on the 30% food arisings. So how full would the bins be? What's the weight of those bins, and also what's the size of those bins, using the RAP, what's it called, volume to weight to volume ratios, etc. So you can kind of get an idea of how heavy a food waste bin will be if it's X full, etc. So, but that really helped us plan out, well, how many bins will we likely need on the street? How many people in this? How many people are likely to use it? What's the likely weight going to be? Everything was run by the operations teams as well. On that point, actually, I forgot to mention in my presentation, but in a previous presentation I've given of this, someone asked, "Oh, why didn't you use lamppost bins?" And the reason for that is, firstly, TfL wouldn't allow bins to be mounted onto their lamppost, which is absolutely fine. But secondly, there were concerns around the crews lifting from kind of shoulder height, bringing things down, particularly if the weight of the bin was very heavy. So we chose not to do that. So the operations teams preferred lifting from the ground. All of the bins we used were roughly about waist height, give or take. So it meant that we could follow the HSE operations guidance RE for manual handling, lifting at waist height, which I think is about 20 kilos or something like that. I can't quite remember off the top of my head. But most of our bins were on average 7 kilos. We rarely got any that were super full. And they couldn't physically be any fuller than that because the bin is quite physically limited on how much you can put in. So in terms of manual handling, that was fine, but it's something that we obviously took very seriously at the start of the project.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. And I'm guessing, Lucy, because you only used wheeled bins, I suppose just a point on that. Did you only use 140s or did you use 240s? Because
it was
240s probably nudging
240s.
towards the...
Yeah, but we'd already, these bins and housing units were very similar to the ones that our crews had already used for estate food waste collections. So, and I was just checking through the monitoring, and our fill rates weren't any more than 40%. So, or 50%. So the bin never got that full. And why we did the monitoring at the start was to check to see if we needed to increase the collections from weekly to like, say twice a week. But that in that period we could see that the bins just weren't being as well, which is not as expected as that well used. So a weekly collection with up to 50% weight was fill rate was fine.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. And then quite a bit around contamination. I suppose first of all, if there was contamination registered, what procedure then kicked into place? Who dealt with that? Shelley, for your project.
Yeah, that's fine. So we probably very similar to Lucy. We expected there to be contamination, right? And we'd also learned from Islington, because they were, I think, one of the first also alongside with Hackney to deploy food waste on street, just to kind of give it a go. One of their key learnings was that you should try and put a litter bin next to your food waste bin. But the streets we were working on, that just wasn't possible, because the streets were kind of clutter free for a reason, and the reason was you couldn't really fit anything on them because they were so tiny basically, and there's already loads of stuff on them. So what we did, we had an agreement with which took a while to bed in, I'm not going to lie. So the street cleansing operatives have their patch and they are there all day every day, right? They know that street like the back of their hand. So we kind of said, if there's just a coffee cup or a can or something like that, can you just take it out so then it's suitable to be collected? That's no hardship. It's no more different than if it was on the floor. But when the contamination was severe, that then did get collected as general waste. Most of these streets in London, and I suspect Hackney's the same, they have refuse collections at least once a day. There's always a truck going past there, so it just meant that could just be forwarded on to the relevant refuse crew who was going past and to collect its refuse and reline it essentially. But again, probably similar to what Lucy experienced, it really does depend. Sometimes you'll have a bin that is always contaminated, but actually there'll be other bits of the street where there might only be a coffee cup or a can every couple of days. So it really does vary on the part of the street you're in as well, really. So yeah, I think follow Islington's advice, and if you can locate or put your litter bin, I would say put your litter bin next to your food bin, because your food bin is the one that you kind of want to be used by the residents. If there's space to do that, then I'd strongly recommend trying to do that to manage contamination. And I think there was a question in the chat of like, well, whose responsibility is it? Because it's on street in the public realm, it's definitely our responsibility to clean that. There's no managing agent, there's no residents that you can write to. It's our problem to have to manage on the public realm, particularly where you've got very busy city centre areas. You don't want food being left, particularly in the summer. If it's near a cafe, you need to have procedures in place to clear and clean these bins as you can, basically.
Yeah, it's good. Lucy, you had anything to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that we got our street cleansing operatives to also get on board. We were told them about the trial and that to keep a lookout for especially the bins that they could open, check for contamination, also check for dumping around the bin, and where there was, like Shelley said, just like a small amount they could just remove. But because we were obviously doing the most of the checking, we would also say remove a bottle or cup. But where there was like a full too much above the threshold, I think it was like 20%, then we'd get the street cleansing crew to come and clear that as waste.
Yeah, good.
And we also try to put the bins as I've said, by the recycle on the go bins, which have the waste side and the recycling side to try and reduce the contamination.
Yeah, good. Quite a key point, I think, here on change of tenancies, about sort of keeping that message live. Lucy, did you do that for long enough for that to become? Did you run it for long enough for that to become, you know, a challenge? And how did you deal with that?
Yeah, well, we only, because of other projects going on, we didn't really have the time to do that much communications, unfortunately. Yeah, so as we're going to be rolling out now, these people using these bins will get a fresh lot of communications, and once we go borough-wide, we will carry on doing regular communications. So just haven't really, unfortunately, because we did do the follow-up monitoring like a few months later over the last year. I think those 24 and obviously half of 25, we haven't really done any communications, just been focused on other stuff. But yeah, we know that the rollout was coming, so we would be doing some wider comms then.
Yep, that's good. Time collections for food waste. Shelley, did you observe any sort of need for additional cleansing where they were just being sort of used in conjunction with the vinyls?
Yeah, so each of the boroughs had their own method or process for cleaning the bins, but it's definitely something that you need to keep hold of. For any London boroughs actually on the call, I have been in contact, and I'm in contact with TfL at the moment to make sure we can try and get some sort of exemption or pre-notification for additional cleansing of the food waste bins on their highways, because at the moment that if London boroughs collect on a red route, there's lots of restrictions around what they can and can't do. So I'm trying to make sure that no one gets a fine for trying to clean some food waste bins in the summer. But yeah, it's really down to each team of how they want to do this, what's workable within their current operational structure. But yeah, anyone on the call, that's definitely something to pick up and take away. You know, what do you do if there's food spilled on the top? Can you use your street cleansing teams to maybe report that? In the summer, you know, you're probably going to need more cleansing than say in the winter. These are going to be outside businesses that are on the public realm, so you need to make sure they're still looking neat and tidy, not only for the residents to really want to use them, because no one wants to use a dirty food waste bin, but to also make sure that the rest of the public realm are happy as well. So what in the toolkit, it's really about thinking about how we're going to do this, how we're going to manage it, and what is the process going to be.
And to that point, did you have a cleansing service in place? How frequently would that have happened, would you say?
They did. It was the jet wash team that tended to do it, because they've got the licenses and the proper equipment to be able to carry those out. Generally it was more ad hoc, to be perfectly honest, in our projects, because the bins are out for 8 months or so. But if you were to roll this out, it would be worth, particularly during the summer months, kind of saying, okay, we're going to do this every, I don't know, whatever it might be for your borough month. And it also depends on the type of bin, to be fair, as well, right? So yeah, just need to think about that and what fits within the capacity, the operational capacity of your borough.
Lucy, did you have a cleaning programme?
No, we clean our estate bins on a cyclical programme, and then we'd include those, or if there's like a complaint from a resident about the bin dirty, then clean that as an ad hoc basis. But when with the rollout, we'd obviously have to ensure that they were included in the estates cleansing process, so that they didn't get missed off. So they will get regular cleaning to obviously encourage use, because that was the feedback as well, that people were concerned about using the bins when they weren't that clean. So yeah, because the main focus was in the 3 months, and then once we'd got that data, we haven't really had the resources to carry on doing like targeted work. But we say where it comes up, we've responded to that.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. Interesting question around the 30-metre travel distance, whether you can actually extend that. What's your view on that, Shelley? I was thinking it's probably advisory.
I think it's advisory, yeah. So it is in the building regs. I think it's part H. I can never quite remember, but it does say ideally 30 metres. But as Lucy quite rightly said, sometimes that is actually impossible to meet. There's just too much stuff on the street. So it's kind of locating it as close as you practically can. If you can do 30 meters, great. But if you can't do 30 meters, it's impossible otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree. That's good. Yeah, Chris, you come in there?
Just a quick one on the flat pack compost bins and the tea bags. Do you think that little nudge or an invite to participation helped with the tea bags and the taking down the barriers? Because obviously it's hard doorstepping to just get to everyone.
Yeah. So I used that from our previous Relondon project. That was something that the previous behaviour change for Flat 2 project that ran a couple of years ago, they recommended that as a way to get people started, and the communications which are on our website, the leaflet literally says, use the tea bag we've delivered you, pop it in your food bin, voila, you've recycled your food waste. So it's about not making it seem like this big and scary thing, but like everyday actions. Everyone probably drinks tea or coffee. So we'd recommend just put in the soup, cheap and cheerful, just to pop in, just to encourage people to use the service.
Yeah, because it starts the process in a non-smelly way. I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I like that. That's good, Chris. Thank you. Paul, do you have a question?
Yeah, what were the challenges with managing your lockable bins with the card? What was the kind of turnover for your cards and etc. and how did you manage that those didn't get into or did you manage that they didn't get into the wrong hands, i.e. businesses?
Yeah, we didn't actually have a process in place to stop residents giving these cards. Because we provided cards at the start, and then if a resident got in contact with us to say that they'd lost their card, metroSTOR provided us with additional cards, so we were able to give them out as replacements. That's only one of the bins, but it's quite a busy area in Old Street, so there would likely be other food businesses in the area that use it, could use it, but I couldn't say if anyone has provided them with a card, but if the bins are not contaminated and they've got food waste in and it getting the tonnage, we wouldn't question anything.
No.
So it's very difficult to know if they are
difficult to know. But what was your kind of turnover of keys? Because you've got new residents moving in all the time, loss of keys.
No, they didn't. So we haven't had that many requests at all. I think it's people moving. They weren't even aware that there is a service. So unless the residents beforehand was very keen and gave them instructions and told them to use contact Hackney and provide the bin. So we haven't. If we went and surveyed now, we'd probably find a lot less residents were aware of the service or using it because there has been such a high turnover. And that's what's been the difficulty with the flash properties. Obviously we do the engagement, we to provide the comms and go and door knock, and then a year later a lot of those residents have moved out. So I think it shows that we've had very few requests for cards that we're not.
And were they bin specific as well? If you had 2 bins that were lockable, we only had one. You only had one. Would you? Yeah, because what we've got an area of high density population near our student accommodation, and what we do for our residual or all our other waste streams is we have communal collection points, and they've got on street like the wider European model. They've got the on street large 1100 litre bins, and we kind of direct them and say, this is your bin, but they can use any bin because it's just lift the lid and put it in. Now your lockable bins or your on street bins, because we're not going to use that in the wider area, because we're not, although we have got an inner city, we're not a big inner city town. We're in Plymouth here, so we've got that area would potentially suit the on street bins rather than have the caddy, the external individual caddies. So that's where I'm thinking that would be useful in our areas. It could go alongside where they've got their existing recycling communal bins. So I was just wondering whether or not you had experience of multiples or not, and what you did with that?
No, we only had the one type of bin, but I think Nigel was saying we moving away from providing the key card opening bins, but we'd probably just do a if we still had them more than one bin, we would just do a standard card that could be used for any bin. Yeah,
I think in the area we're talking about, we don't have a lot. It's not where we've got a lot of businesses below. It's kind of just condensed housing, or older housing that's been converted into multiple flats or houses in multiple occupation. So yeah, no, just interesting that we're rolling out we are in the project phase of rolling out, so we're not rolling out yet. We're getting prepared, and we're looking at solutions for those areas, which was due to be on-street caddies, but each premise you could have 5 of the larger caddies because there's 5 flats within a building. So that might be a solution, funding permitting, to go down that route. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, interesting points there. I don't think there's an easy answer in terms of access control. The metroSTOR, we've been focusing more on an app-based solution, which has got lots of advantages in that you can actually then monitor and track who's using them, when they're using them, and that sort of thing. It's got some downsides as well, or a simple key code. Of course, that can be passed on, that can leak out, but then you can change the code. You can say, look, everybody, 2026 is a new code, and sort of wipe the slate clean. I don't think there's an easy answer, but there are some potential solutions, that we've been working on, and trialing in different areas. The app we've got working in Washington DC, there's about 4,000 registered users, and they're collecting 25 tons a month. So
I've got a bit of a supplementary question to that. Do you think having the key code or the card impeded kind of reduced participation slightly because people didn't have it, or did you not notice any difference? Did you not?
Do you want to go on there, Lucy?
Yeah, looking at the tonnage, it was actually slightly lower in Old Street bin, but it might have been that you've got no
comparison, have you really?
Yeah, it's difficult to compare.
Your thoughts, really.
Yeah, I think it would probably have been more an issue like when residents move in because they can't access the bin and they don't know how, rather than like and in the initial time that we were monitoring. So it's difficult to say, unfortunately.
Yeah, I guess that'd be. I just thought you might have a feeling that actually, or you spoke to someone and said, "Oh, I didn't do it that day because I didn't take my key down by mistake, so I just put it somewhere else."
Yeah.
Human behaviours kick in, don't they?
Yeah, we did do some try to do some monitoring, follow-up monitoring. Survey door knocking in Old Street a few months later, but we didn't get that much. Weren't able to speak to that many people to get that much information. It was very low contact rate to really add that much of an observation.
Yeah.
I did notice from a quick calculation, just looking at the number of households and the amount you were collecting, that it was probably 80% less in Old Street than the other areas. It could have been other factors influencing that, of course. But I thought, do you know what? I'll probably take that to get clean material, slightly reduced volume, but have it clean.
Yeah.
I think the contact rate was a bit lower in Old Street as well. It was harder to get access to those properties, so obviously there would have been less residents using it.
It's difficult when you've got one bin, isn't it, to kind of do any comparisons? But I just thought you might know, and I guess ultimately the green aim is to get recyclable food waste out of other waste streams. So if we start to impede access to, do we really care that I use the wrong bin, or I go by and I don't belong in that street and I'm eating an apple and I throw it in there? No, we don't. That's better than it being thrown in the wrong waste stream, isn't it? In the bigger picture of things.
Well, that's been excellent. Thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Lucy. Really appreciate the effort you put into this and all the things you shared. Thanks for the attendees as well, and the engagement has been outstanding. Hope you'll take away some useful tips. And I think as we have some housing colleagues on the call as well, you'll find a lot of this will apply in any flats, flat neighbourhoods, not just flats above shops. Really appreciate your time today. Thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your day.